Looking at question 16 from the SAT QAS test from April 2017, and let's jump in. So the question says, what main effect do the words clueless and mind reading have on the tone of the passage? So a couple things stand out to me right away. We're talking about these two words here, clueless and mind reading, and we're asking specifically about the tone of the passage. So questions about tone on the reading section actually don't come up that much, but when they do, typically we're dealing with one or two things. So when they're asking about tone, they're typically asking about a pair of words or one word, and they're going to ask how does it affect the tone. And really, as far as I can tell, on most SAT questions, there's really only two kinds of tones that you have to know. The two kinds of tones are formal and informal. Formal and informal. Now, in real life, there's all kinds of tones that you can use. You can have a sarcastic tone, a dispassionate tone, you can have a skeptical tone, you can have a joyous, a hopeful tone. There's a whole variety of tones, right? The way I look at it is like you can have like a crayon box. You can have 16, 24, 100 plus different crayons, all those different colors and shades of emotion and nuance. Those are your tone. However, what I find in the SAT is it's very black and white. It's basically informal, informal, casual, and a little more technical or scientific, informal. So I'm going to expect my answer choice to have something to do with that, something to do with the informality, something to do with the words being casual, and we'll look through an answer choice like that. Now, there are occasions where they're talking about the tone, and they're really not talking about the tone. So instead, they're talking about basically clueless and mind reading, how do they affect the meaning of the passage. So I'm still going to go back and do my due diligence. I'm still going to go back and look at the lines, get a sense of what context they're being used in, and then go carefully through my answer choices. But I'm going to start and begin by saying it may have something to do with being informal. So let's start with 38. That's right here. This basically says it is not perfect insight, but it is also far from being very clueless. Here we're talking about basically our understanding of how groups proceed. What this is doing is this is saying maybe we're focused on the wrong thing. So maybe we're focused too specifically on these abstract traits like intelligence or trustworthiness or leadership ability. And if we just narrowed our question or simplified our question to just look at whether people like us or not, then we would be at a better pace. We'd be understanding things a little bit better. And it's basically describing the ability to predict how other people feel about us as mind reading, which is obviously a little bit tongue-in-cheek, not necessarily funny, but this is about as humorous as you're going to get on the SAT, very dry. So it's basically, we know it's not mind reading per se, but that's how they want to describe it. So I think that we're on the right track if we're going to look for the answer choice that talks about being informal. So let's look at A. A says they contribute to a casual and gently humorous tone that, renders a potentially specialized discussion more approachable. So the casual and gently humorous part matches everything that I've been saying. I think it's right. Again, humorous, we're talking about humor on the SAT. I think the Black Book has some comments on that. I'll put out a video a little bit talking about humor on the SAT. Not a main thing, but we just know it's very dry. So it's definitely not laugh out loud funny, but that's as funny as the SAT is going to get. And then basically we're rendering a potentially specialized technical discussion more approachable, easier to understand. So I think this is a good choice. It's matching everything I've been saying. Let's keep it for now. B says they contribute to a slyly mocking and disapproving tone that reinforces the author's criticisms of the researcher's conclusion. So I have two problems with this. First is slyly mocking and disapproving. So these are kind of negative characterizations, which you're unlikely to find on the SAT. It's unlikely you're going to find a slyly mocking tone. The other thing is that it's very specific, right? Remember what I said, generally tone falls in one of two categories, informal versus formal. And here we're talking about slyly mocking and disapproving. We're getting into more specific, nuanced categories of tone, which is rare. It doesn't mean it can't be true, but it's rare. But really the main thing is this, that it reinforces the author's criticisms of the researcher's conclusion. And this is just not correct. The author is kind of a neutral third party, just sort of narrating the results of the experiments. If anything, they're in favor of the experiments. I really haven't seen a passage on the test where you have this tension between what the author believes versus what the research they're analyzing. It's a little too sophisticated, I think, for the text. So definitely the author's not criticizing their conclusions, so I think we can get rid of B for sure. C says they contribute to a deeply pessimistic tone that stresses the impossibility of ever knowing how people truly perceive each other. So this is definitely going to be wrong, and here's why it's going to be wrong. First thing is that we have deeply pessimistic and we have the impossibility of ever knowing, right? So these are wrong because, one, they're both negative, deeply pessimistic and never knowing anything, right? The other thing is that they're just incredibly strong. Not only pessimistic, which is strong by itself, but deeply pessimistic. And not only we hardly know, but impossibility of ever knowing. So very strong claims, which means you need very strong evidence on the text, which is just not there. And moreover, really what the passage says is that we do understand, right? When we're talking about being clueless up here, that comes immediately after understanding that we're actually pretty decent at understanding how groups of people feel about us. And even when we're talking about individuals, it says that we have a tiny glimmer of insight. So it's not impossibility of ever knowing. Let's get rid of C. D says they contribute to a thoughtful, okay, yet uncertain tone, so far so good, pretty neutral, that casts doubt on the real-world usefulness of experimental data. And this is the part here that's going to make it wrong. Casting doubt on the real-world usefulness is basically saying, you know what, this data, this research that we're doing, it doesn't really matter in the real world. It's too theoretical. It doesn't apply to the real world, which is a pretty, one, it's just nothing the passage says, and it's unlikely that we'll ever find a passage that talks about that. It doesn't really have a positive stance towards science or towards research itself. So it's just unlikely you'll find this opinion or this perspective on the test. And in this passage, it's definitely not there. So let's get rid of D. And that's going to leave us with answer choice A for 16, which is our correct answer.